Terima kasih, Shaq. Assalamualaikum, everybody. I'm going to moderate this panel on property development. And let me introduce, first of all, my panelists, my fellow panelists, in the order they're going to speak. First, Reiman, who is Managing Director of IEN Consultants. It is a pioneering green building consultancy. It's been in Malaysia for 22 years. Gregors has worked on many projects that feature energy efficiency, are good for people's health and connect with nature, like KLI2 and also Green Tech Malaysia Building that won an ASEAN Energy Award in 2020. Next, architect Serina Hijjas, who is Vice President of Malaysia Green Building Council and Chairman of Green Building Index Accreditation Panel. She's one of the creative directors at Hijjas Architects and Planners. Her Malaysia pavilion at the Dubai Expo was the first net zero carbon pavilion. She also worked on the Heriot Watt University Green Campus and a number of energy award-winning buildings. Next, Afzaa Aziz is project manager with Tropical Rainforest Conservation and Research Center, TRCRC. Afzaa works with Sime Darby Property Berhad as a collaboration in their Elmina Rainforest Knowledge Center to protect and regenerate native rainforest species. She also manages conservation sites in Selangor and Perak. Afzaa holds degrees in sustainable cities and development studies from King's College and SOAS in London. So she's kind of at the younger end of my panel, I feel, but it shows also she's one of those people that's kind of coming up through the sustainability field all the way from the beginning, from university. And last but not least, our special guest, actually, Yang Berbahagia, Datuk Engineer Ahmad Asri Abdul Hamid. And he is Chief Executive of CIDB, the Construction Industry Development Board. As many of you know, CIDB is a statutory body under the Ministry of Works, and it regulates the construction industry. CIDB stands for Professional Construction Industry that delivers a sustainable built environment. Dr. Asri is a mechanical engineer, and he worked with JKR for 13 years and CIDB for 21 years. And he's been chief executive since 2016. So actually, kind of, he's more at my end of the scale, but still, I'm further at the other end. Now, Gregors, the way we're going to run this, slightly different from the other panels, ladies and gentlemen. Gregors, Serina, and Afzaa will take us through, back to the report that we talked about earlier, the property and construction section of the reports. We're going to deep dive into that, and they will take us through one by one the recommendation areas. Dr. Asri will provide some comments before the Q&A from the viewpoint of CIDB on what he's heard. And then I will kick off with some questions for each of the panelists, and I will try to watch for, I'm looking down here. If you see me looking down, I'm looking at the Q&A box. I will try to seamlessly blend with your questions. Listen, I cannot get to all of them, I'm sure, but I will do my best to do that. Right, now we're all going to keep to time, right, guys? So first of all, let me pass over to Gregors Reiman, who will discuss with us the policy recommendations in the reduce operational and embodied policies area. And then he will pass to Serina, who will pass to Afzaa, and then I'll call in Dr. Ahmad Asri. Thank you very much. Over to you, Gregors.
Thank you very much, Raslan. Johan. And thanks for the opportunity to give some highlights from the report. So I will be talking about 4 of the points. And let me start with the first one, which is on energy efficiency in both new and existing buildings. So there's many projects in Malaysia that have already shown you can easily achieve 50% or more efficiency in existing buildings as well as new buildings. So to accelerate this, we are proposing that the government immediately accelerates the adoption of the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act. And this would basically help to set mandatory energy audits for the big energy consumers and also make mandatory energy efficiency targets to be met. So this is a great way to set a legal framework for this in Malaysia. We also recommend to implement the UBBL clause 38A requirement in all states of Malaysia. And this basically has to do with meeting some minimum energy efficiency standards for the design of buildings. The next one is on renewable energy. And I think we've heard a bit about this already earlier. But what's interesting is that a lot of this renewable energy can actually be placed on the rooftop of buildings. Some studies show that in the future, when Malaysia is fully powered by renewable energy, then 1/3 of the energy will actually come from solar panels on the rooftops. So therefore, we propose that new construction should look into integrating solar power in the roof, or at least make the rooftops solar ready. So this becomes a requirement. And also to help promote the adoption of solar, we propose to reinstate the net energy metering, the 1-to-1 rate. So that means you basically, when you sell solar power to the grid, it's at the same rate as you buy from the grid. And this is supposed to be last until solar systems with battery backup reach grid parity. And we also propose to increase the quota for these NEM installations, and also to have stage grid reforms that would allow distributed renewable energy power to be implemented throughout Malaysia. Next slide. So the next one is on low carbon building materials. And this is becoming more and more relevant, because as we make our energy sector more renewable, we are still left with the building materials, which will then become the major carbon emitter from the building sector. So therefore, we propose the following policies. The first one actually has to do with refrigerants for the air cons and chillers, because some of these have very high global warming impact. So it's simply to make sure we replace the old refrigerants with newer ones that have much lower global warming potential. But we also propose to increase the use of low carbon materials, such as cement replacement in construction. And these replacement materials can come from waste products from industry. So for example, from fly ash. And you can replace up to 40% of this without any cost impact on the construction and without impacting the construction time of construction. So, so this really should become common practice, and perhaps we can introduce a statutory requirement to this effect. And lastly, on waste minimization. So relating a bit to what I just said, that construction materials will actually become a main contributor of CO2. So of course we want to minimize the waste, and this can be done, for example, by boosting recycling networks, also enforce the Waste Act, which is Act 672, and this should be enforced in all Malaysian states. But also promote the adoption of industrialized building systems. So basically the construction is done often off-site, and you basically bring in prefabricated panels to some degree to the site. So this both reduces waste, but also improves the quality of the construction. Over to you, Serina. We can't hear you.
Just a little bit of background. The previous two roundtables we've seen this morning were really about a discussion around the issues pertaining to the industries in those areas. For us, basically in this roundtable, we're actually taking a deep dive specifically in the report that has already been developed over this 1 year from the roundtable that we did last year for direct recommendations to the government about how we can achieve the advancing of the pathway of net zero. So we wanted real solutions that can be forwarded and put forward so that we can accelerate this, these areas. Under the property and construction, we all know that basically buildings contribute quite a lot, and we see the potential that buildings can have a 50% energy savings, and looking at both the embodied, operational, the governance, and then of course, overarching that's the biodiversity. On improved governance and awareness sector on GHG emissions, our recommendations are here that, you know, there's two parts to this: improving the governance structure that we have. Both private sector can contribute to this drive to accelerate the climate transition, but government too, in terms of instilling some of the priorities so that it can come top down and then the industry can meet it. As far as the private sector, we're really interested that they promote carbon footprint measurement disclosure, and the PLCs establish board sustainability committees to enable compliance to the MCCG. But from the government point of view, if a central coordinating body at the state or federal, state and local basically would see us forming a much faster transition or accelerating this transition and improve the governance structure. So whilst we have set absolute GHG emission targets, as opposed, we are looking basically not just at intensity, which currently is our target nationally. We are really hoping that the government will start to move into the sector of setting absolute GHG emission reduction targets and set a net zero roadmap specifically on these emissions in the areas that we are targeting. And make carbon measurement, disclosure and data assurance mandatory. I think this, instead of becoming just a voluntary from the industry through the ESG, through Bursa, making these disclosures, but making it now more mandatory at all levels. Capacity building is one of the areas, I think, the word carbon, I don't know if many are really clear about what we're targeting. It's very abstract, and we feel that in terms of capacity building, we need people to understand is just as important as oxygen. It's the opposite of oxygen, and the creation and maintenance of GHG database through different states and local authorities. I believe they're starting to build up on that in the low carbons, but we can accelerate that with a common reporting framework that defines key matrices for data collection, energy, water, waste, for example, and offsets are to be defined. To mandate GHG reporting through regulations and promote use of smart technologies and data gathering. We have the technology of data gathering at our hands now, and perhaps we should accelerate in the next 3 years in terms of collation of this data to set the baselines that we can actually improve on and adopt that countrywide, especially in terms of populating database. On the GHG database, capacity building and community participation is just as important. We need to have this push factor. We need government to support and accelerate at both the state and local authorities. If we can set a Malaysian carbon assessment framework on water, and these also includes the measurements actually, which we probably will touch on a little bit later in our discussion. But we don't have, for example, tropical forest sequestration that is tropical trees. We are still using the international standards, and although FRIM is probably developing that at the moment, we need this information because we are in a tropical environment. So the water, waste, power, carbon assessment frameworks are important targets that we can start to set up now, and that the engineering, architectural, the developers, the industry can then be able to translate that. When we talk about science-based, that's what we mean by science-based, actually having the real data that can allow us to see the real-time change that we're campaigning. But I think awareness and education, as we've seen from the Orang Asli presentation, they're aware. They may not have the words to describe carbon. We are basically in the cities describing it as carbon, but they are describing it as climate change and erosion of that in their point of view. I'd like to pass it over to Afzaa.
All right, thanks, Serina. So I'm going to be talking to you about the role of property and construction in conservation, particularly on biodiversity and natural carbon sinks, which is the tropical rainforest that Serina mentioned in her segment. So basically, just to kind of understand the urban setting, so many of the urban areas that are located in biodiversity hotspots are significant in population and geographic size. So these cities and the future development of these cities are critical for the persistence of rich biological resources and conservation of these resources. And the reason being is these have crucial ecosystem services of which we are all very aware of. For example, food, water, as mentioned in the previous segment about protection from natural disasters, protection from climate change, as well as support for health and well-being. And it's not just cities that have large natural ecosystems that are already in place or already there. With the global urban land expansion that will continue to happen over the coming decades with the increase of urban population, it's even more important that remnant forest patches, restored ecosystems, and managed green spaces in urban areas are all more critical as a refuge for biodiversity. So I tend to talk a lot about biodiversity, but sometimes I find that perhaps people may not understand the core of what that means. So biodiversity, in short, is for biological diversity, which is the variety of life, such as the range of plants, animals, and all organisms that can be found in a singular ecosystem, which also includes us human beings. And for many people, biodiversity tends to be something associated with rural areas and places that are a lot more remote. Whereas you can see that there are various species of plant and animals that are alive and thriving. And it's important to remember that biodiversity also exists in cities and other urban areas. So TRCRC is working with Darby Properties for the promotion of urban biodiversity, because the reason maybe perhaps we don't notice the urban biodiversity as easily in these places is because we need to help it flourish. And how do we do that? So nearly any city in the world can create interventions to enhance their local biodiversity. For instance, in our tropical climate, kind of like low-hanging fruit, which should be addressed most urgently, would be connecting fragmented ecosystems, which is a very useful strategy to increase the ecological function of our forested areas. This can be achieved through planting trees to expand forest cover and the tree canopy. It's also important to establish corridors of multi-layer plantings along roadsides and verges, as well as introducing eco-links such as tunnels and vegetated overpasses. For example, in the creation of highways, perhaps it may be in consideration that if it cuts through a forest reserve, that there is a vegetated pass or tunnel that doesn't break up the forest that's already fragmented. So there's so many aspects that cities can look at in terms of restoring their existing green spaces and draw increased attention to local biodiversity. So that's more on the first point of role 8. So the planning and design and management of urban areas is integral to enhancing biodiversity and ecosystem services. And biodiversity management and conservation should not be an afterthought. It should be something that's integrated every step of the way. So from the planning stage right down to the execution at every stage of the execution of the development of cities as well. And there's a role to play from both private and public sectors, which I can get into a little bit later during Q&A. And I think that expectations of the public have never been greater on both the public and private sector. And I think it puts a lot of pressure to not only deliver financial performance, but also to make positive and meaningful contributions to the environment and also the communities in which they operate. So for instance, the Elmina Rainforest Knowledge Center, it's strategically located adjacent to one of the remaining forest fragments here in Selangor, which provides a gateway to our natural heritage. And this very small fragmented urban forest has managed to endure the test of time and a lot of human disturbance, and still remains home to many endangered flora and fauna, which a lot of people are not aware of. And the focus of this center and the role of TRCRC in this urban space is also to supply native trees in the reforestation efforts of the Elmina Central Park. So this helps to increase urban biodiversity value and creates an environment that provides opportunities for greater commitments for conservation to be realized. And planting native trees will kind of go hand in hand with reducing the heat island effect. So we plant, we're very strict on planting only native, because that means that local wildlife will also be able to eat it and live in it. So, and we also know that using local species in green features, green spaces, and forested areas ensures that these remaining trees will continue to thrive. And to talk about the second point, which is the reducing the heat island effect, it goes hand in hand, because the heat island is basically urbanized areas that experience much higher temperatures than outlying areas, because structures within them, the gray structures such as buildings, roads, and infrastructure, will absorb and re-emit the sun's heat more than natural landscapes would, such as forests and water bodies. So the highly concentrated gray areas where greenery is limited becomes islands of very, very high temperatures. And planting native trees and greening urban spaces will directly improve this heat island effect. And tying back to what I was saying earlier about a multi-layer planting approach to green spaces is a good way to do it. And kind of going to the biology of it a little bit, is how it helps is that it is through a process of transpiration. So plants take up water from the ground from their roots, they store their water in their leaves, and then the water eventually travels outside from the underside of the leaves, and then it turns into water vapor that's released into the air. And that is effectively nature's air conditioner, if you'd like to call it. And even without the threat of climate change, the protection of ecosystems and biodiversity in both rural and urban areas is still a priority, because ecosystems underpin all life on Earth. And as we all know, the people and the planet are only as healthy as the ecosystems that we all depend on. And it's really just kind of like, to summarize, it's to kind of make people realize that our natural heritage is also a natural capital that is also a critical economic asset and a great source of net public benefit. So yeah, that's my part.
Thank you very much. So thanks, Gregors, Serina, and Afzaa, for those brilliant sort of exposition of what's in the report in the different areas. Now, I'd just like to turn to our special guest today, Yang Bahagia, Datuk Ahmad Asri. And just get from you for a few minutes, just your thoughts before we go to Q&A. We'll come back to you again during the Q&A, Datuk. But just before we go to Q&A, what are your thoughts on what you've heard so far from a CIDB angle? Sir, you are muted, Datuk.
Okay. Thank you, Datuk Sri Johan. So I'm here today to represent the Ministry of Works. I understand the invitation was extended to the Honorable Senior Minister of Works, Datuk Sri Fazila, but he's currently performing his Umrah. So he had delegated it to me. And I think it's appropriate due to the fact that CIDB is basically the custodian of the construction industry, and the environmental sustainability is one of our core program or core business that we do. So I've noted from the presentation and the reports that there are three areas that has been touched. Number one is the strategies to reduce embodied carbon in built environment. Number two is reducing operational carbon in the built environment. And the third one is improving resilience and minimizing ecological damage. So looking at those three topics, and I would like to actually comment this report or from these three angles, because it's actually very in line with the construction industry transformation program. And so let me just talk about CITP, the construction industry transformation program, and come from that angle. Basically, what we have done is that we see the construction industry has been plagued with the issues of low productivity, very poor quality, high fatality and accident at sites and all that. So these problems, when you study back, the reason being is the fact that we have been very obsessed with the conventional method of construction. And this conventional method of construction is characterized by the fact that it's low adoption of technology, very labor intensive, and hence because of that is the 3D perceptions, and it's dominated by the foreign workers. Now that COVID-19 come into play, foreign workers are not allowed to come in. All construction projects, most construction projects are affected because we don't have enough workers. So that's the issue that we are facing. And for that reason, in 2014, 2015, we have formulated with the industry what we call the Construction Industry Transformation Program, CIDB. And CIDB, basically, the idea of having CIDB is basically to transform the construction industry. We want to change the way we do construction. Then and only then can we truly improve the construction industry. And the two technologies that drive that transformation in our CIDB was basically the industrialized building system, or some people call it prefabrication and modular construction. And the other one is the building information modeling, or BIM. So IBS has been strongly promoted and encouraged during CIDP. But what I want to touch about CIDP in particular is the fact that the one of the strategic thrusts, we have 4 strategic thrusts under CIDP, and one of that is environmental sustainability. And the challenge we in CIDP, that one of the model that we use is basically trying to get everybody involved. We have the initiative working groups. We have so many initiatives. I can't remember the exact number. There's so many of them. Each initiative have got an initiative working groups involving industry players, academia, government agencies, relevant government agencies. And this IWG, we call it the initiative working group, will elevate the issues to the next level. We call it the trust working group. And from the trust working group is elevated to a ministerial committee chaired by our minister. And if there are serious issues or significant issues, then it will be brought up to the cabinet for decision. So basically, those are the governance structure that we have. And we try to get everybody involved, and alhamdulillah, CIDP, I consider it successful because of the fact that we managed to bring together and drive a lot of changes in the industry because of the involvement of other ministries, associations, and industry players. And this is important because if you talk about environmental sustainability, it involves so many parties, so many agencies, looking at basically the enforcement, the act, and the rules and regulations that come with it. We have so many parties involved. Sustainability, you must understand, CIDB is basically an industry-based agency. We look at in construction industry, but there are agencies that look at the scope, certain elements. For example, if you talk about safety, it comes under the Department of Safety and Health, DOSH. You talk about productivity, come on the MPC, but we overlap because of the fact that we look at the industry as a whole. So we come to sustainability. Actually, the whole thing come under KASA, Kementerian Alam Sekitar and Air KASA. But you look at the various components that you have identified, the areas that you identified. For example, energy efficiency, that come under Suruhanjaya Tenaga, which is under KESA. And then you talk about renewable energy, it comes under SEDA, which is under, again, KESA. And then you talk about low carbon materials, KASA have got this My Hijau mark. So I consider it's under KASA. You go waste minimization, it comes under SW Corp, which is under KPKT, Kementerian Perumahan dan Kerajaan Tempatan. You see, the involvement of so many ministries and agencies make it very challenging for us to address all these issues that you have brought up. Anyhow, the positive side of it is that each individual agencies have got their basically their regulations and the rules in place. And the approach of developing each strategic trust for under CIDP is basically we look at the ecosystem of the trust itself. For example, if you talk about environmental sustainability, I always look at 4 basically elements of the ecosystem. Number 1 is the legal framework, the regulations, the procedures, standards, and all that. Number 2 is the creating awareness, as mentioned earlier, creating awareness and promotion. The third one is capacity building to create competent person as well as to train companies and all that to be at par. And the fourth part is basically incentives. And so these 4 components come together to establish the basically ecosystem of the particular trust. And for environmental sustainability, the ecosystem is already in place. When we talk about regulation, there are so many regulations that that we have now, the law and all that. For example, you talk about legal requirement, we have the Uniform Building Bylaw, earlier mentioned about energy efficiency, clause 38A and all that. This comes under KPKT. And then we have the Environmental Quality Assessment Act under CASA, Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act under CATSA. And also we have JKR instruction as well, internal instruction for the use of rating tools like MyCREST and PHJKR and Infrastar. And also we have sustainability framework by Bursa Malaysia. So look at standards and guidelines. There are quite a number of standards and guidelines that have been established, including those that have been established by CIDB as well. And looking at the rating tools, we have got MyCREST, we've got GBI, we have got Green RE and all that. So and also the capacity building side, we have been actively, training our MyCREST facilitators, Infrastar facilitators, as well as the certified energy managers. And when it comes to awareness, I think we have a lot of platform for that. We have the iGEM, and then we have Archidex, and even CIDB, we've got the International Construction Week that basically promotes sustainability. And when it comes to incentives, we have the Government Investment Tax Allowance for projects, JITA, we call it JITA for projects, and that also basically provide tax incentive for environmental sustainability, and also green technology financial scheme. So you see the ecosystem for environmental sustainability in construction is already there. So the challenge now is basically, if you ask me, we among the achievement that we have achieved under CIDB is basically we have established the rating tool, we call it MyCREST for buildings, and later we developed and introduced the rating tool for infrastructure, we call it Infrastar. So this MyCREST now has been basically accepted under JITA project. Just now, if you want to get the tax incentive, you must use MyCREST. And if you talk about green procurement under APU, they've also recognized MyCREST for works, for project. So basically MyCREST is widely accepted, and JKR has also specified that for projects above 20 million, they have to use either MyCREST or PHJKR. So basically the MyCREST is generally accepted now as a rating tool for buildings. Of course, GBI is more widespread or being more widely used. But also under CIDB, what we have done is we have basically produced a number of guidelines, and we also provide incentive. We actually, when it comes to MyCREST and Infrastar assessment, CIDB fully subsidize it, and our trainings and all that, and we fully subsidize it to encourage people to come in and be familiar with this MyCREST and Infrastar. So basically, those are the things that we have so far under CIDB. And the thing that I also want to touch is the fact that if you ask me how we want to move forward in environmental sustainability as far as CIDB is concerned, if you ask me, I would say the best is for us to make MyCREST rating tools and Infrastar rating tools mandatory. The reason being, the elements that you touched just now, talking about energy efficiency, renewable energy, low carbon materials, as well as waste minimization, all that is actually covered under MyCREST. So if a building were to adopt MyCREST rating tools, then they would have incorporated all this to make sure that they get a certain score. Then eventually this element will be taken care of. And at the moment, like I mentioned earlier, MyCREST is only enforced in JKR project that exceed 20 million, and for Infrastar, which is a rating tool for infrastructure, which also cover the elements that I mentioned just now, is actually compulsory now, mandatory for JKR project, infrastructure JKR projects exceeding 100 million. So basically, those rating tools are being used, but if we can mandate it to the industry, then it will be better because everybody will basically use MyCREST. And if everybody were to use MyCREST, to me, you look about the ecosystem. I always believe that the driver of change in the four components of ecosystem just now is actually basically the regulations and the legal framework. If you were to do that, you enforce that, then everybody, the whole team will come into place. So to be fair to the industry, what we have to do now is basically to focus on capacity building, creating awareness and promotion, and after that, looking at the incentives. Incentives is already there. So basically now, once that is okay and stabilized, we should go towards enforcement and making mandatory for certain thing like rating tools, MyCrash rating tools. So that's my view on the overall presentation and report. Thank you, Datuk Sri Johan.
Dr. Asri, thank you so much for that. You've shown us the parallels and so on with what we've already been discussing and how it all can work together. Excellent. And with that, while you're talking about making mandatory, make it a level playing field for all the different players. Now, what I'm going to do, thank you so much. Thanks for everybody. What I'm going to do now is for about 25 minutes, we'll have some Q&A. Then I will, so that's the roadmap. Then I will ask for very fast, just one final point from each of you before we end. Now, one point only, right? Not like 5, 6. And then, but so over to Q&A. I've got a question for each of the panelists, and I've got a number of questions all building up in the chat box. I'll try to move to that as soon as possible. So just to kick off, first back to Gregors, because you've been waiting a while since you first started. Just one question for you. The International on Energy Efficiency, the International Energy Agency (IEA) considers energy efficiency as the cleanest and cheapest way to reduce carbon emissions. Is this also true for Malaysia? And if so, what are the key energy efficiency potential in the building sector? Gregors, what do you think?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, energy efficiency is actually, to quote the former Minister of Energy, YB Yin, I think it was, sorry.
Yes.
She actually said energy efficiency is the lowest hanging fruit. And as you notice from Malaysia, Malaysia has actually done quite well on the promotion of renewable energy. But she was in a way tacitly admitting that maybe they should have started with energy efficiency, because that is the lowest hanging fruit. And if you also look at the economics of it, in the building sector, typically you will have a payback time of about 3 years. So if you build an energy efficient building, you would maybe spend a little bit more upfront cost, but from the energy savings, the break-even time is about 3 years. And once we start paying the real price for energy, because it's quite underpriced, we're not paying for all the pollution and externalities, then of course that will drop to, let's say, 1 year or something like that. So we really should be pushing for energy efficiency in the building sector, both through maybe some environmental taxation, but also through legislation like the EECA Act.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. Now, Serina, back to you. Carbon measurement. How can we get government to impose carbon measurement for all new projects, and who will take the role of creating this carbon benchmark and standards in the construction industry? In your view, what do you think about that?
Well, I'm very interested in what Datuk was mentioning, and less so about making green mandatory. I think that's a must. I don't think it needs to be specific to a tool, but I think someone like CIDB has an integral role. What we are missing at the moment is our own carbon measurement, in the sense that our own measurements of standards. I come because when we did the net zero for the pavilion, what was missing was a tropical tree sequestration, for example. The measurement of that is not available, and FRIM had to start looking at some of those so that we could see what was the carbon sequestration of tropical trees. At the moment, all we have is the carbon measurement for energy, that is basically from power of electricity. We don't have our own carbon benchmark standards with regards, we still refer to the international standards with regards, for example, of embodied material. So we need those kind of measurements. We don't have one for water, for example. So water, we've been asking for years, Malaysian Green Building Council has been asking for years, what is your carbon equivalent for water for Malaysia? So these standards, I believe someone like CIDB can basically assist, where they are basically looking at measurements and standards, can assist if they can accelerate these areas.
All right, thank you. Okay, Datuk, your hand is up physically.
Okay, can I interject just to
absolutely
on this matter. MyCREST, the difference between MyCREST and other rating tool is the fact that it's a performance rating tool which integrate element of sustainability and carbon reduction, which means to say that we have a carbon calculator inside MyCREST to calculate the carbon, basically the carbon emission for the particular building. That's number one. Number two is we have now come up with what we call the inventory of embodied carbon for construction materials. Meaning to say that for reference of architects and all that, if they want to see the carbon, basically the embodied carbon for a particular material, they can check this inventory that we are producing. So only that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks, Serina. Moving to Afzaa, you know, the little bit of a segue through the trees and that Serina mentioned. What are the biggest challenges that you find in protecting urban biodiversity in this urban development landscape, which most of us live in, to be honest, that are here today? And how do you close the gap? So, biggest challenges, briefly, Afzaa, what do you think?
Yeah, okay, very briefly, I think the biggest challenge, especially in urban spaces, is quite similar to what Datuk Asri mentioned, is that there's so many different stakeholders involved, and there's a lot of overlaps in terms of jurisdiction. So it sometimes is a lot of red tape and bureaucracy to try and actually make positive conservation efforts happen. So that's one. And then secondly, I would say the education and understanding of biodiversity is quite lacking in all of the different policies that have been implemented. And also professionalism in the people carrying out the conservation efforts in urban landscapes.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, that's very fast, very brief. You kind of caught me on the hop as I'm making notes. Okay, hang on. So, okay, thank you for that. Dr. Asri, quick one back to you. Panelists mentioned, let's go back to this embodied carbon, because you know in our industry, the embodied carbon is the key action for construction sector, and in particular the use of low carbon concrete. What role can, we hear about low carbon concrete quite a lot, but haven't actually seen it in practice. What role can CIDB play in accelerating the adoption of low carbon concrete?
Basically, again, I refer back to MyCREST. MyCREST have got these low carbon materials. They didn't specify low carbon concrete per se, but they do say that if you were to use low carbon materials, then you get extra points and all that. So basically, MyCREST rating tool encourage you to use overall the low carbon materials. And the other side of it is the fact that when it comes to low carbon concrete, CIDB we have organized a seminar where we invite speakers from Canada and Singapore to talk about this technology of low carbon concrete. And also we have conducted talks on green cement for a number session of green cement, but somehow it's still not popular among stakeholders, and the reason given is that the cost is higher. So we are still now trying to find ways how we want to make this basically pervasive, because it is something very good, but it's always come back to cost. You ask why people don't adopt environmental sustainability, they will go back to cost. When we tell them that, no, your operation cost, you talk about the building, the embodied carbon part of embodied carbon is only about 15 to 30%, but the operation is about 50 to 70%. Actually, when it comes to talk about carbon emission, meaning to say that we should be addressing the operation side of it. So when we talk about overall sustainability, when we want to justify the fact that you need to go for sustainable practices and all that, so that your operation cost will go down, they will not value that. They see the initial cost is important. They will not see the long term or the life cycle cost or whatever cost, long term cost that they're talking about. It's the immediate cost that is of concern. Even you go to the house buyers, you tell them that this one is 100,000. It doesn't, but this one doesn't got green features. This one 110,000 got green features. They go for the non-green features building. So that's the challenge that we have. So the adoption of low carbon concrete is still very low now.
I see. Yeah, thank you very much. It's something that's always preying on our minds in the companies themselves, getting people over that hump of awareness and into understanding they're going to cost a bit of money. Now, I'm going to go to questions that are coming from the floor. I'd like to ask kind of related question from Marina Yong. How can we instill, maybe this one is more Serina and Gregor's, I think. How can we instill green building design in public perception? So many residential and commercial developments are not even, not really green, even though they say they got green credentials, but in reality it's not. So what do you think? I'm posing it. Maybe Serina or Gregor's might want to answer this.
I think degrees of green are spoken here, and sometimes I think the elephant in the room, I actually want to mention it, is also some greenwashing. But we are seeing some changes from that. So, green buildings have been around for the past 10 years. As, between all three tools, I can say safely there's probably about only 1,000 projects that have gone for green. Out of what we have still, a large number of existing buildings, which are about 90% of the footprint. I think the only way we're going to shift this 90% of the footprint to go green, if it becomes mandatory to go green. And again, I said it doesn't need to be a tool, but it needs to be that all new buildings have to have a building performance of 50% reduction of energy, for example. I think this has to be the new target. We've been achieving 50% reduction year 3 of green buildings. So it's no longer, the incremental cost is 1 or 2%, 3% at the very most. So there's no, we have data on that too. So data is showing that. I think, where Singapore has made it mandatory, we really have to make it mandatory in this way, people's awareness. But we are going to start on a campaign for residentials. I think this area of residentials, not a lot of people know. But the area of residentials, about how low you can go in terms of reducing your footprint. So instead of calling it the ecological footprint, or WWF does, it would be your sort of ecological building footprint, if you like, for your residents. So the normal common man can actually know that too. That's something that's been spoken about.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody jump in with these answers? I got a question here from Ping Teo, from a development group. Can the government offer tax incentive suggestion for such as stamp duty waivers for purchases of green certified houses and buildings? This could be a highly effective mechanism to create the demand for the green buildings immediately. So there's a suggestion. Anybody want to? So you might just say yes, great idea. But is there anybody has a comment on that?
Yeah, I can pitch in. So actually, there is a good precedence for this, not for buildings, but SEDA here in Malaysia. They had this cash voucher program where if you buy the most efficient aircon on the market or the most efficient fridge, then you were actually given, I think it was a voucher of about 200 ringgit. And that helped to basically lower the price of that sort of more efficient aircon to more or less the other aircons. And the subsequent evaluation of that program showed that each time the government subsidized 1 ringgit for these cash vouchers, it helped to save people 9 ringgit because during the lifetime of this aircon, during the lifetime of this energy efficient fridge, they would actually get the savings back from lower energy bills. So I don't see why we couldn't do something similar for the building sector.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, chip in and put your hands up if there's any, and everybody put questions in the box if you have more. Or the more I say that, the more questions come. Okay, back to Greg. Look, I'm sorry to bang on about green cement, but here's a question from Gavin Teo. Based on my understanding from ready-mix concrete suppliers, green cement is available in the market, but to use recycled concrete waste to replace aggregate in mixing is not available in the market. May I know? Okay, Datuk, listen to this one. Okay, it's coming to you. So recycled concrete waste to replace the aggregate is not available. May I know what are the initiatives that CIDB or other authority departments are proposing to drive green concrete? So I suppose you kind of answered this already. But anybody wants to expand more about the green cement or lower carbon cement, I'm told is the way to talk about it. If not, I'm going to go to more back to a biodiversity angle. So Afzaa, have I asked this one? Okay, question to Afzaa within from Sharif James. Within urban landscaping that seeks to improve biodiversity as one of the objectives, is there a place at all for certain exotic species or a few mixed with native species, or is the issue a clear no? This thing of exotic versus native species, what is exotic species? Afzaa?
So basically, exotic species are species that are not native to Malaysia. So for example, species that are not found in our country naturally. So for example, a tree that has been introduced from South America to Malaysia for commercial purposes, for landscaping, or for commercial fruits, for example, those are exotics. Native species are species that are found native to our country. The distribution belongs in our country.
Okay. So is it a clear no to have a mixed use?
Okay. So I mean, for TRCRC, we are strictly native. For the reason being because we are working in forest restoration. So we're not going to be introducing exotic species to rainforests in which it doesn't naturally occur. However, if you're looking at models of like agroforestry, for example, perhaps there'll be multi-layers of a mix of exotic and native. And I think in having said that, it's quite important to understand the difference between green spaces and forested spaces. So they're both green, but if you're looking at forested areas, you wouldn't introduce anything in there that's exotic, because that is challenges the integrity of the ecology of that system. For example, like you may have, Serina?
Yeah, so it's native and adaptive, basically. I think a lot of all the green tools basically promote the idea that you only do native and adaptive to the tropical environment of Malaysia. I mean, you can't be growing species that are basically from the northern hemisphere or all the rest of it, just because the water requirements, the temperature requirements, then you could speak about the ecological requirements. But hitting on your urban heat island aspects, Datuk, I think really what's great coming out now is, and this is where data comes in. They've done the measurements for 3 cities, Think City in Penang, Perak, as well as Johor, and they're showing the temperature differences for these, from 10 years ago till now. And it's basically showing all the urban heat islands. So I think data, where we can now do data mapping, to do a survey, I can actually get a data mapping of both in terms of the trees, or even doing the drones. Basically, you can get all this kind of information, and that's available to Malaysia now. We can actually see the impact of that. And this is where the proof is in the pudding. When we get the data, it's very, very clear where that's coming. And so the heat island mapping has already started in these 3 states. If every state started to do this and looked at where they're actually having their fixed forests and urban developments and urban heat islands, they'd be able to know what the transition needs to happen. So data here is good.
Right. Thank you. Moving back to CIDB a second, Datuk, the question, actually it's my question. I've heard a lot about the Uniform Building Bylaw, and it's something that, mentioned by professionals in the industry, the panel in particular, they've heard it's been updated. Can you share any key changes in the updates, and where does it stand actually?
Okay, the Uniform Building Bylaw, UBBL, has been amended, and then after that they have incorporated 38A at that particular time. And not so fortunately, I would say unfortunately, there are only 4 states that adopted the amended UBBL so far. And now the most recent one, UBBL has been amended again. And this time around, the good thing about from our perspective is that they have incorporated a lot of our requests to support the implementation of industrialized building system or IBS. In particular, there are two major areas of improvement that or major elements that they incorporated. Number one is the fact that they enforce the use of modular coordination. That is very important to implement IBS, because the dimensions have got to be standardized for a factory to produce components. So that's number one. And number two is the fact that they eventually accepted the performance-based kind of clauses, meaning to say that now they allow the use of alternative materials, not specific material as before, but alternative material, as long as it's comply with BOMBA requirement to our fire rating and so forth. So that's to me, it's a very big breakthrough, because we have been pushing that for quite a while now. So this amended UBBL is going to be presented soon to the chief ministers and the MPs, the Menteri Besar. And after that, the state should go back and adopt it like the original UBBL. So those are the changes that's happened recently.
Okay, thank you very much. That actually reminds me that in this coming year, CGM, we are trying to work out how to actually dive into the states, because the next level federal is one thing, but then so much happens down the state. Then you got the countries, the cities and the town councils and all. It's quite a complicated landscape, this ecosystem, isn't it? Where you have the states and they all have their own ability to basically veto. Okay, look, I'm sorry, I still got another CI because you are here, Datuk. You know, the questions are piling up. I think you're muted, so better unmute. What is the progress, CIDB? What is the progress on driving 3D construction printing and robotic bricklaying? Has this so 3D construction printing, 3D printing, and what should we call it, robotic bricklaying? I didn't know there was robotic bricklaying, but obviously there is.
Frankly, we have not embarked on robotic bricklaying yet at the moment.
Yeah.
We prefer that things to be done, you know, in a factory, and the component is produced in factory, transport to the site and all that. So that's more favorable, that kind of IBS that we are promoting. But on the 3D printing, you see the issue with IBS is we are still very component based. And when we talk about IBS, we are component based, meaning to say that the companies will produce walls, doors, windows and all that, and they transport to site and assemble. But Singapore has gone further, one step further, by going to what they call volumetric construction. Volumetric construction means they basically construct rooms, toilets, staircase, everything in the factory, and then they just go and assemble. So it's a lot faster, it improve a lot in terms of construction industry as a whole. Yeah. But we are looking at the 3D printing as a way to leapfrog this. And we actually, there's a company that cooperate with us to do research on this, and they have brought in the machine from Finland. And the machine is now in our site at Jalan Chao Saudi, and they are supposed to build a house using that 3D printing. So the last time I went there about 2-3 weeks ago, they are still trying to get the right mixture, because they're trying to use local materials rather than the material from Finland. So they're trying to get the right mixture. And I was told that last week they have already resolved that. So this Tuesday, I will bring our senior minister of work, Datuk Sri Fazila, to the site to have a look at the construction. Hopefully it will be a success, because like I said, that will be a very big leapfrog compared to what we are doing now. So, and we are bringing another machine, in fact already arrived in Kuching as another 3D printing machine. So we have two now, one in KL and one in Kuching. Yeah. So this is basically now we are doing research, and hopefully it will work. And JKR is ever ready. The Director General of JKR said the minute it works, I will bring it to Panellists to build a house, because he already had a project to. Okay. So good, I think that, and the minister is very excited. I said this is going to be a breakthrough for you, game changer for the industry. It's going to be good for you. So,
well, we all wish you a lot of luck.
Yeah. With the month of Ramadan, I hope we will be successful.
I hope so too. Okay, I'm just going to do one last question before we go to your final wrap-ups, and I'm going to go to Gregor's. And this is another kind of elephant in the room that we don't mention. It's always there. Okay, according to the IMF, Malaysian direct and indirect subsidies to fossil fuels amount to a staggering 187 billion ringgit per year, or 13.2% of Malaysia's GDP. To what degree, it seems a lot, to what degree will carbon tax help to level the playing field? How can carbon, so let's talk a bit about carbon tax. I mean, this, I happen to know this is something close to your heart. What do you think, Gregors? What's your take on it?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And yeah, I think that is an elephant in the room, because once you include the real cost of energy, of course, we had direct subsidies for fossil fuels, but the biggest subsidy is the indirect one, because we don't pay for all the pollution that they cause. So that is both in terms of climate change, but mostly in terms of air pollution and the adverse effect on human health. So once you factor all that in, it's actually a huge amount. And I think you mentioned IMF says it amounts to almost 200 billion ringgit per year in subsidies. So that's a lot of money. And I think that's where, I mean, by right, we should follow the polluters pay principle, which actually Malaysia signed back in 92 in the Rio Declaration. So we should have this kind of environmental taxation in place. And that's exactly what carbon tax is. So whenever we pollute CO2 or other greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, then we should pay for that pollution. And given the fact that climate change is maybe the biggest issue of our time, it's been identified as an existential threat to humanity. It's just really odd that we can still pollute free of charge with greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. So definitely we need to have this kind of carbon tax. And I looked a little bit into it. So the International Energy Agency, who came out with a zero emission plan that brings us back on track to meet the Paris climate targets, is basically saying that developing countries like Malaysia should, by 2025, there should be a carbon tax of about 200 ringgit per ton of CO2. So that's really around the corner. And then that should be increased to about 900 ringgit per ton by 2050. So the good thing about a carbon tax is it's sort of the tide. It's like a tide that raises all boats. So once you make something expensive, people will use less of it. So these kind of energy intense or high carbon intense products will then become much more expensive, and you shift the whole development in a low carbon direction. And carbon taxation has very little loopholes. So in terms of enforcement, it's very easy, because it's a tax that you have to apply to the key places in the society. So I think carbon tax would be a great way to go for Malaysia.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. I'll take that as your final word. So I'm now going to, because you've had your final word now, Gregors. I'm now going to thank you very much for that, because I know that was your thing. I'm going to go Serina, Afzaa, and then Datuk, your final thought, your final one thought that you would like us to take away. Serina.
Well, I think it's great that we're all here and there's a cohesive move and shift. I believe the pandemic has been really great in focusing all of us in advancing net zero. But the transparency of data where we are now and our realistic targets, establishing our Malaysian carbon equivalents will allow us to track realistic progress. So carbon is still this abstract entity to most of people on the street. The action requires really quite a coherent understanding from federal, state, local to close this gap. And I think this gap really needs to be closed, in the next 3 years, this understanding, and then really effectively working towards it after that. That's my final word.
Thank you. Afzaa.
Yeah, so just to kind of summarize my thoughts on this is, with a greater transition towards environmentally friendly and decarbonized economy, I think it's very clear that there's far greater future economic value in the protection of our ecosystems rather than the extractive economies of the past. And having said that, a shift away from the thinking that sustainability is an expensive added cost, I think that a shift away from that is very important in order for greater efforts to be realized.
Thank you. That's very succinct. So now, as our special guest, your final thought for us, please, here in CAN and CGM.
Thank you. Before I go to my final call, just one statement, just one finding I want to highlight. We actually did a study on carbon emission. We found that construction industry produced 76 million ton carbon emission per year. And out of that, you talk about embodied carbon, out of that 90% is from the materials. So, and then 7% is construction work and 3% is transportation. So we really need to go for basically the use of low carbon materials to address this embodied carbon issue. Okay, my last word is, I am positive that we are going in the right direction, because if you see that, like I mentioned earlier, all agencies have got all the regulation, the acts and all in place. It's just a matter of putting all this together so that it would jive and then move the thing forward. And now the collaboration between ministries and agencies are excellent. So because of that, like I said, I'm very positive that we will, we will achieve our environmental sustainability agenda. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We've reached the end of our time, and I feel as though we stand in a room now, which maybe the room can be built by 3D printing, but it has to be a very big room because it's got a lot of elephants in this room, so a non-stop elephant. But I think the more we expose the elephants, and who are all painted green, as long as we discuss, sounds to me as though everybody is of the same opinion, including in the other panels before, that this golden thread running through the whole thing is collaboration, discussion, and coming together in a spirit that we all want to resolve and succeed in this, in order that we can survive from the most developed, of the urban people to the Orang Asli, who are the most vulnerable to everything that happens in climate change. Really want to thank everybody that's been the panel today. Dr. Asri, our special guest, and everybody at CIDB who's helped out to get you here as well, and Gregors, Serina, and Afzaa. Afzaa stood in for her boss, who is actually stuck up a mountain somewhere with bad, very bad internet. And I think you've done very well in putting forward the case. So thank you very much. And I'm going to hand back now to Sunita.
Thank you so much, Johan. That was a wonderful, wonderful session. Datuk, Asri, thank you. Serina, Gregors, Afzaa, you guys have been fabulous. It's so good to hear from all of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Look forward to your involvement in the upcoming property sector roundtable sessions. Thank you very much. Now on.